I used to love Christmas. It was my favorite time of year. The lights, the music, the cozy feeling of being home. But last year ruined it forever. It started innocently enough. My parents were hosting our annual family Christmas party, complete with way too much food, and my dad's infamous punch that could knock you out after 2 cups. The whole house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and we had carols playing in the background. Classic holiday vibes. The weirdness started around the 10 p.m. I was in the kitchen, refilling the snack trays when my little cousin Ellie came running in. "Santa's here!" she yelled, bouncing on her toes. I froze. Santa? No one had planned for a Santa to show up at the party. I thought maybe one of the neighbors had gotten creative, or one of my uncles had decided to surprise the kids. I followed Ellie back to the living room, where a man in a full Santa suit stood by the Christmas tree. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there, holding this massive sack over his shoulder. Everyone else was just as confused as I was. My dad laughed nervously and asked, "Who hired Santa?" No one answered. The guy in the Santa suit finally spoke, but his voice didn't match the cheery image. It was deep, gravelly, and off-putting. "Merry Christmas," he said, dragging out the words like he was trying them on for the first time. The kids didn't seem to notice anything weird, and ran over to him, excited for presents. He knelt down, reached into his sack, and started pulling out gifts. The weird thing? They weren't wrapped. They weren't even toys. The first thing he pulled out was an old, dirty doll with one eye missing. He handed it to Ellie, who looked at it and started crying. The other kids stepped back, uneasy. "Who are you?" my mom asked, her voice shaking a little. Santa didn't answer. He just stood up, towering over everyone. He was way taller than I realized, easily over 6 feet, and his shoulders seemed too broad. Like the suit didn't quite fit him right. My dad stepped forward. "All right, buddy, time to go," he said, trying to keep things light. But the guy didn't move. Instead, he reached into his sack again. This time, he pulled out something that made my blood run cold, a long, twisted piece of wood. It looked like an old cane or maybe a staff, but it was splintered and dark, like it had been burned. "I bring gifts," he said, and his voice sounded even deeper now, almost echoing. The lights flickered. "Okay, that's enough," my dad snapped, stepping between Santa and the kids. But before he could do anything, the man in the suit reached up and pulled off his hat. What I saw underneath still haunts me. His face wasn't right. It was pale, like paper, and stretched too tightly over his skull. His eyes were sunken, but they glowed faintly, like embers, and his mouth was too wide, filled with sharp, jagged teeth. The kids screamed. My mom grabbed Ellie and pulled her away, but before anyone else could react, the man, or whatever he was, leaned forward and whispered, "You invited me." "No, we didn't," I yelled, finally finding my voice. He tilted his head and pointed to the fireplace. I looked over and felt my stomach drop. There was a piece of paper on the mantel that hadn't been there before. It was written in black ink, and it only said one thing: "You promised." The lights went out completely. When they flickered back on a second later, he was gone. The sack, the staff, the twisted face, everything had vanished. We didn't sleep that night. No one talked about it. We just pretended it didn't happen. But every now and then, I see him. Not in person, but in reflections. Store windows, car mirrors, even on the shiny ornaments on the tree. Just a flash of that pale, stretched face and glowing eyes, like he's watching me, waiting for me to remember what I promised. I still don't know what he meant, but one thing's for sure: I'll never celebrate Christmas the same way again.